Okay, good evening. It's a couple minutes after 7. We'll go ahead and get started. Um, we had an overwhelming response to this. I asked Mike, I said, "How many people you think will sign up for this?" He said, "I don't know, maybe 5 or 6." And we ended up having over 80. Now it'll be interesting to see how many actually show up. So, but I guess
They just got their
time
first
will.
quarter report and realized that it
Yeah,
ain't looking
maybe.
good. So
It may be. But anyway, thank you for giving up part of your Tuesday evening to be with us. We set this up again, like Mike said, thinking there'd be just a few people, but now there are a lot, maybe potentially. And I had sent out a couple of emails that listed about a dozen things, as possible topics. And then Mike pointed out to me that nobody's going to see that as possible topics. They're going to think we're going to cover all of that. And I said, well, that's not going to be possible. So we'll see what Mike's prepared for us tonight. But what I think we'll probably have to do is do this a few more times, right? So we'll see about that and see how that goes. But maybe we'll do it again roughly this time next month and the month after, and see how much of that we can get through. If you have a specific question while Mike's talking tonight, feel free and send that to me in the chat, and I'll definitely keep all of those, and that'll give us a little bit of direction maybe for the future meetings. Mike says he's going to go for an hour or so tonight, and at the end of that, whenever he gets finished talking, we'll just open it up for questions and see what we've got there. But if we get to that point in time and you don't get your question answered, just let us know, and we'll try and get back to you, either set up a time to talk or by email, whatever. So, this is not the first time we've done a Zoom meeting, but we're not experts by any stretch of the imagination. So hopefully this goes well. But if it doesn't, I'm going to blame it on Mike, and then he's going to blame it on me. And so we'll see how that works out. But everybody is going to remain muted. In fact, I'll probably even mute myself here in a second, just so there won't be those kinds of possible distractions going on. And I can't think of anything else. So
well, I can think of a couple of things, Max.
Okay.
Before we actually get started, originally we had intended, or I had suggested to Max that I wanted to do a mastermind program for a certain period of time, like 4 months, 6 months, and go really deep with the doctors. I mean, we've been coaching, or Max and I have been coaching together, and then before Max was doing it back in the early 80s. And the biggest disappointment I found is that, it was easy to give them the best processes and the best protocols and systems and train the staff, but it always came back around to the doctor being the main reason the practice goes well, the main reason it struggles. And if the doctor doesn't really engage in this process, it doesn't happen. And I guess it's been 5 or 6 years ago, I had a endodontist that wanted me to come do a program in Portland for about 4 hours. And he was going to invite clients, people that referred to him, but other doctors that didn't, in the hope that they would start referring. And he asked me how much that cost. And I said, well, I won't charge you anything, but I won't come for 4 hours. And he said, what I want to do is I want to come 5 times for 4 hours. All you have to do is pay my airfare. It was live, we didn't have to Zoom it. And I'm going to teach practice management to as deep as I can go, in those 16 to 20 hours. We had 500 or 600 people there each time. We had it at the ADEC plant, where they assemble the chairs and stuff. They had great room and stuff like that. But I followed these practices, not all of them, but I had probably 70 or so that I followed. There wasn't, in the 70 that sent me the information, there wasn't one practice that didn't increase their collections by 20%. Now, there were other improvements, but so I found it maybe, I've never been able to do this again. So I want to do this mastermind deal. So I'm proposing that we do this again. I remember when Max and I used to travel around doing seminars, in person, that not just invitations to the Yankee Diddle meeting or something like that, but we were doing and paying for it ourselves. We walked in one time and asked a group, if you just had a magic wand, if you could design the program that you wanted to hear, what would you want to hear about? And we wrote it down on a blackboard, and over 8 hours or 6 or however many hours it was, we covered everything, and everybody seemed to get what they wanted and even more out of the presentation. So what I'm hoping, and this is hard to do, is to get feedback from you during the question time about things that you would like to delve into. And we did have 4 or 5 doctors send us questions prior, and they were all about one thing. It was all about, I guess they were older, Gary. They were all older, and they were thinking about either multiple practices, multiple locations, DSOs, and what makes my practice valuable. So I wanted to do a program tonight. I started thinking about that and just put something together primarily from that, but foundationally, if you think about it, what makes a practice worth something in the future are the same things that make it valuable right now. And so whether you're just starting a practice, or you're thinking about that second practice, or you're just starting out, or you're going to buy your first practice, or you're a seasoned doctor, I think you're going to find that it's very consistent at what makes practices valuable and what makes them profitable and what makes them a great practice. So Max, I'm going to try to share my screen and see how this goes. Okay. And let me get rid of your smiling faces. Okay. So Max, does that look okay? Okay, let's talk about an average practice. I think we need to have one point of reference, one point of truth, that when you start thinking about, what you need to do in your own practices to make them better, whether it's your perspective, a consumer's perspective, the CPA's perspective, the value to a buyer, and the value to the seller, you need to kind of understand what an average practice looks like. And it's straightforward. You go to the ADA website and look this up. It's one doctor, one hygienist, one front desk, generally one assistant, and then kind of a girl Friday, someone that can work front desk and assist. Now, I would have to say that I have a set of beliefs, and so I'm going to tell you what they are real quickly before I start discussing this, because I have a slanted view of dentistry. I kind of operate from the perspective that, you're never going to actually arrive at being the perfect practice, or the great practice, that it's a journey. But I also believe that average isn't a goal that anybody should have. And in a way, who needs another average dentist? Certainly the consumers don't. I believe that practice growth is a symptom of giving people more of what they want and less of what they don't want. In our consumer-driven society, our patients vote with their feet and their pocketbooks. So if we give more what they want, foundationally, you're going to have consistent growth. And when I say consistent growth, at least 10 to 15% a year, forever. Okay. So I do believe that every practice, no matter where you are, can grow that 15 to 20% a year. I believe that everyone can do better than they're currently doing if they embrace change and they kind of guard those core things that we all have in our practices. I said this just a moment ago when we were just kind of chewing the fat here, is that I believe that the owner, or the dentist, the owner dentist, is the number one reason practice does well. And it's the number one reason they struggle. And so we're constantly in conflict with the owner doctors to be accountable for everything. And I really believe that real, tangible, sustainable change is necessary to keep up in today's marketplace. So an average practice, there's nothing wrong with an average practice as long as you're saving at least 20% and your burn rate's not very high. But for most of us, our burn rate is, life suck is pretty bad. You know, it's very high. It's very common to see that, very commonplace to see that. So they have a 67 to 75%, 74% overhead, 20 to 30 new patients a month. Collections are around 650, maybe 700, and then it breaks it down for you. Now, I don't think anybody, when they're starting out, is going to look, you know, say, my goal in life is to have an average practice. We all are looking for something better than that. Now, whether you ever get there is totally different. Oftentimes, the only reason you got into dental school is that you made better grades than somebody else. And you get into dental school, and then you get out and realize that maybe this profession doesn't play to your, I don't know, your assets, to your personality, to your gifts. And then you kind of feel stuck there after spending all the money and time to do this. Now, every practice follows this type of growth. Marriages do too. Okay, you start out at survival. I mean, we all remember when we put on that T-shirt that we will do whatever it takes to be successful. Well, what's happened today, if we go back 15 years and follow all of the dental graduates, we now are at the highest point of dental graduates we've ever had at 6,800 this last year. There was a time about a decade and a half, 2 decades ago, where it was 98% of the graduates became owners. The other 2% either didn't practice dentistry or went into public health or something like that. But it was common to have well over 95% of the doctors becoming owners. Today, that's changed. It's, you know, if you go back 15 years and follow the graduates, it's now has 51% female graduates, 49% male. Of the females, only 32% are graduating and going into ownership. Only 67% of the males. That means 50% of the doctors that graduate from dental school are never going to be owners. Now that's maybe generational too. They would rather, you know, not take any risk for the security of a job that it was funny, you know, when the pandemic first started, I follow several Facebook groups that are all dental, and I could see all the young associates going, this is awesome. You know, I'm so glad I signed with this DSO. We're going to be protected. It only took about 4 weeks and they realized they no longer had a job, and they probably weren't going to have a job when it came back. But as you look at this, the X and Y axis would be time, and then the vertical axis would be money. We start out at survival. You know, we're just barely able to pay the bills. But that point, from that survival point up to that profit plateau, is some of the most exciting time in your career. I mean, you know, you've equipped more than the 2 ops you started with. You're doing more than the average practice. You're learning new procedures. I mean, that graduation, you know, ceremony and that diploma was just a learning permit for you. So you start to grow, but every practice gets to this plateau, and it is also self-defined. I mean, it's defined by the doctor. It has nothing to do with the timeline down there. It could happen in the first year. It could happen. It may never happen. It never happened to me. We'd hit a little plateau and I would do something different. We'd go up again. But this is the general graph of life and graph of your practice. And so as you're thinking about the things I'm going to be talking about, think about where you are on this profit plateau. If you're at that profit plateau, maybe it's time to add an operatory. Maybe it's time to move. Maybe it's time to add that other doctor or another hygienist or whatever it is. But if you're way over on the leisure side, you're wearing plaid pants and you've got a metal detector and you're walking down the beach looking for coins, you know, you're probably not going to like this, what I'm going to talk about today. Now, most doctors, I had a doctor that asked me to look at their practice. They were thinking about selling it. And they were telling me that, oh, we're a super busy practice and we make a lot of money. I went, okay, awesome. That's great. It means you're going to have more value there. So send me the stuff. Okay, they send it to me. And they had basically 2 doctors working there, and it was doing about $2 million a year. Hygiene was doing about 40%. So really, the doctors were only doing about $50,000 a piece per month, and they thought they were doing incredibly great. Now, so I'm faced with looking at numbers and now talking to somebody who thinks their practice is great. And I don't think most practices can handle the truth. Many won't even look at the truth. But like it or not, when we stop and really take count of what we're doing, it's kind of like if you play golf, it's your golf card. You just played a tournament, it's your golf card. You remember when you really screwed up or when you really did well, but the other holes are kind of they're kind of foggy. You start looking at that, you're going, I'm sure I parred that hole, but it was a bogey. And so when we get down to looking at what grows practices and what holds practices back, you're going to find that they're exactly the same thing when it comes time to sell them, what gives them value. And so most practices can't see their defects, consequently, they can't work on them. It's not that there's not a person here that couldn't fix them. It's that you just don't see them, okay? Now, I have doctors ask me what my practice is worth. Now, I think that's something personally, I always knew what my practice was worth. I always looked at it this way. And so as you look at it, it depends. I mean, I would think, I wrote an article just a couple of weeks ago, that's why it's kind of fresh on my mind. Generally, if it's been over 2 weeks since I wrote it, I can't even remember what I wrote. But I was writing about the different types of practices and kind of what gave them value and things like that. But in generalities, we have a Medicare, Medicaid way off to the left, and we have a boutique practice way off to the right, that fee-for-service boutique practice way off to the right. And in the middle, a big middle, there's a general practice. We have general practices that hover close to Medicare, Medicaid type practice or a high volume practice. And we have ones that huddle closer towards a boutique practice, but maybe they're not fee-for-service. Okay. Each one of those is general areas have a value. The most valuable one, I mean, if I could look at you straight in the face, the most valuable one, most people would judge to be the fee-for-service boutique practice. Now, the ADA tells us that less than 6% of all the dental practices that they come in contact with, that they do their research on and stuff like that, less than 6% are fee-for-service. And I would bet of the 6% that are fee-for-service, at least 50% of those are older doctors that just don't fool with insurance at all. It's not because they've made a statement and I'm going to be a fee-for-service dentist. But there are areas in the United States where you're going to have at least, most areas have at least 75% dental insurance penetration. And there are areas like Washington, D.C., where it approaches 98% of the people will have dental insurance. And I guarantee you, they all belong to the same insurance deal, that if you were not in network, you might struggle. Okay. So the most valuable practice from the prospect of a sale at any point, regardless of any economy, is always going to be a Medicare, Medicaid practice. It will sell for well over 100% of 1 year's collection, well over. And the reason it does is that if I bought that practice and it was doing, I don't know, $500,000 a month on Friday, and I started working on Monday, it's still going to produce $500,000 a month because all I have to do is keep up. I mean, the people are there because it doesn't cost anything. Okay, they're not there because of the validity of your reputation or your reviews or anything. It's just cheaper. So it's 100% transferable to a buyer. You look at a fee-for-service practice that's boutique, and what you find is that practice is worth maybe 40 or 50% of the last 12 months collections, maybe one time the net in a year. That's what the practice is worth, where a general practice is going to be worth 70, 80% of the last 12 months collections, or about 2 times net. And we're going to talk about EBITDA and stuff here in just a minute, but I just, So it's counterintuitive. The boutique practice, because it's not transferable, most people aren't that talented. It's driven by charisma, by a skill set that most people don't have. And sometimes the age of the doctor attracts the age of the patients. Generally, we attract people around 10 years on either side of our age. When you get to my age, 10 years on one side might be, 60, 58, something like that. And on the other side, they're all dead. So again, I worried when I was putting this together and making the proposal to Max that, I wondered if people would come, if we could just tell them everything that's true about running a dental practice. And part of it was a little bit selfish because I was told right before Christmas, I was looking at an insurance actuarial table that my lifespan is 78. Well, I'm 3-4 months into my 72nd year. And I figured that I could even do that math without taking my shoes off. And I'm thinking, okay, that's about 6 more Christmas trees or one dog that doesn't live very long. Okay. So part of me wants to make sure that I can reach out and touch people. Now, okay, so what's your practice work? Okay, well, it's going to depend, on your collections, on your overhead. But a lot of doctors think, well, okay, what's going to make my practice work? I've got up-to-date equipment and stuff. I'm sorry, you got a 3D cone beam in a brand new office. It's not going to affect the price 2 to 5%. It's the goodwill that does it. And so the average practice is going to sell for about 1.5 to 2.5 times net. Now, a lot of doctors going, well, they call me and go, well, should I get a certified appraisal? Well, that's not worth the paper. You could put it on toilet paper. It's not worth anything. A bank won't look at it. I mean, they just laugh if someone has a certified appraisal. They take the numbers, look at the buyer, look at the seller. They know how to run the numbers and run the spreadsheet. And they decide whether or not the price is a price the buyer could pay and service the debt. Okay. And they get their money back. So oftentimes certified appraisals are worthless. Now, if you have no place to start on the value of practice, certainly it's worth that. But just be careful. Now, I had one of the questions that asked me, and I think it was Gary that asked me about, EBITDA, or there were a couple of them that asked me about EBITDA. I mean, certainly what the E stands for, it's earnings. This was a term started in 1981 by a corporate rater that didn't look at medical or dental practice, was looking at large corporations and decided if everything was paid for, and this includes the CEO, everything was paid for, there was money left over. That's called profit. That's earnings. Okay. Well, almost well over 60% of the dental practices I see have no E, no profit. Because if you work and you only take home 20 to 30%, that generally is about what you'd have to pay an associate to do what you did. So we have to first take at least 30% of what you did and put that in the expense column, okay? It's not in the earnings column. Then what would be left would be earnings. And so most people that use the word EBITDA in the sense of working with a dental practice is really using this incorrectly. Now, DSOs, the largest one, we won't mention a name, but they were purchased by KKR back about 2 years ago. They had to get special financing. It's now rated as a C- company, and they've got over 8% debt to income. Okay, KKR could barely get any financing because it was such a bad deal. And so what you see in DSOs is they grow by mergers and acquisitions. And the only way they can do mergers and acquisitions is if they find an equity partner, that would be money, somebody that wants to get a return on the money, that will give them the money, and then they buy these practices. Well, what they're quickly finding out is that when they buy a practice, they're not able to raise up the profitability of that practice. I mean, their group purchasing may help a little bit, but generally the doctor that sold it is kind of on retirement mode by the time they get in there. And that's why you're seeing so many of these DSOs challenged right now, is that one, it's a great opportunity if you can find somebody to give you a bunch of money for your practice and you're in your late 50s or early 60s and it's 3 or 4 times what you think it's worth. I would certainly do it if you've got 2 or 3 years left in there in your tank to do that. But again, they're not paying the true value of your practice. So when we think about, what makes a practice grow, how do I judge my practice? What are good targets to shoot at? I need you to keep in mind that the greatest value to you is the amount of money and how you handle that money, that lifetime of earnings before the sale, not the sale. If you're hoping that sale will pull your, you successfully ended 3 marriages, you live about 10% higher than you earn, it will not do it. I mean, truly, if you sell a practice to an independent purchaser, if you worked 1.5 years to 2 years more, you would have the same amount of money. So it's not going to be a great deal of money in the sale. So it's interesting when I have doctors present an appraisal to me from a broker. Okay. Now, you do realize that if a broker is telling you something and their lips are moving, all they're interested in is the deal. Okay. They're 6 to 10% of the money they're going to skim off the top for doing absolutely nothing. Okay. So they're required to tell you that when they do this, that the numbers that they're giving you, they have no idea where the numbers came from. The seller gave them to them. So they have any idea whether any of this is true. And then they take and give you a value using 4 or 5 different methods. It might be an asset. It might be a historical. It might be a recent sales of, practices that are similar to this, stuff like that. But they're required to put this notification there in some form. And it's taken from the IRS publication here. The fair market value of your practice, your true worth in a practice, is the price that a seller with no compunction to sell and complete understanding of the facts would sell it for, and what a buyer with no compunction to buy and complete understanding of the facts would pay you for it. So this is kind of like having a real estate agent tell you, so they can get your listing, say, you think your house is worth, 500,000, and they tell you, oh, no. I've seen houses in this very neighborhood that weren't half as good as yours, sell for 700. I said, I think we can get better than 500. And so you sign on the dotted line, and then they've got you for 12 months. And lo and behold, the economy crashed, or there was a pandemic, or people just aren't buying this type of house anymore, and you settle for a lower fee. So again, this is the true definition of what your practice is worth. Now, when you look at your practice, let's say you're growing a practice, you're thinking about selling it, or you're going to expand. Okay, there's 2 views: this macro view, step back and look at it, real, big picture view, and then the micro view, or the details. Okay, each one of these are super, super important, and I'll touch on them as we go through here. But they're all served under one giant roof. There's one thing that prefaces each one of these, that goes before each one of them, and it's your understanding of consumerism, because it affects location, it affects demographics, your business numbers, your overhead, and everything. Location is not just, well, I'll tell you an example, which would be better: a freestanding building, or on the 3rd floor of a business, professional building. Obviously, a great standalone location where you're visible is going to be better than in a professional building. In fact, if you're in a professional building, you should be spending at least probably closer to 5% on marketing, and then add another $5,000 a month to that, just to compensate for being in a bad location. But from a consumer standpoint, location might be, it's easy to find, there's plenty of parking. So we're looking through the optics, not of what your CPA would look at it, and not what a doctor would look at it, not the way a doctor thinks, but the way the consumer thinks. That's what gives value here. So what's going to make this more valuable? Okay, what's going to make your practice grow 10, 15% a year for 40 years? Okay. Now, in that book, The Super General Dental Practice, it goes through this on chapter 16 and 17, I believe. where it talks about benchmark and stuff like that. But there's other things when we look at value that you need to look at. But there is in the book very detailed explanations of why this is. So I'll try to explain it, but you can get a lot deeper understanding. So just take a look at this. Now, we know an average practice does about 25 to 30 new patients a month. Now, if you want a valuable practice and you want a practice that spins off cash and profit rather than just a good income, you got to have more than 30. Okay. And so depending on the demographics of where you are, for example, in my main practice, and we've owned practices in other locations, but in McKinney, Texas, the demographics was about 32.3 years of age, and there were children. Okay. So if you have a lot of kids in your practice and 47% of my patients were kids, I needed more patients. So I got closer to the 70. But you've got to be over what an average practice would do. In fact, if you think about it, in an average practice, that hygienist, that one hygienist that works in that practice of 25 to 30 new patients a month, by hygienist, they get about 25 to 30 new patients a month. And when you start growing, you have to add that second or that third hygienist. The expectation from a business standpoint is that you would increase the number of new patients by at least 25 to 30 for every hygienist that you add. Okay. And your goal in life is going to be have twice the number of hygiene hours as doctors. Okay. So what makes value? Well, for some people, it's real estate. Could I buy the building when I do it? But for most practices, because most practices lease, a reasonable lease that is assignable makes your practice valuable, because you can't assign it. A lot of what I'm paying you for, what the value that you paid for, are those leasehold improvements. At least $100 a square foot. So you have 2,000 square feet. There's at least $200,000 in that I'm paying for. If I can't get the lease that you've got at a reasonable rate, it makes the purchase maybe untenable. And so anytime you offer to buy a practice or you offer to take over practice, you want to check to be sure that it's what type of lease is it? A triple net lease, regular lease? Is it assignable? And then you don't want to do it when the lease is short term, because you would want to renegotiate it. And I would make any offer on purchasing that practice contingent on a successful negotiation of that lease. Now, what gives, if you look at your practice, and there's 2 or 3 things that are coming up just boom, boom here, that whether you're just growing your practice, you're young starting out, these are super important numbers that no one ever talks about. One is your production per op per month. I mean, if you've got 6 ops, then you ought to be doing around, ideally, you could, from a physical capacity, do somewhere in the range of $150,000 to $180,000 a month in that facility. Now, let's say you've got 6 ops, but you're not doing that. I'm not saying that's bad. What I'm saying is there's no physical capacity blockage. And so when people buy practice, if I were going to buy a practice, I would look at this and I would want to know how close they were to capacity. If they were doing 25,000 per op, that practice might not be valuable to me unless I could expand the number of operatories, because I couldn't grow it any more than that. Okay. Production per staff. Say you had 6 staff people. Okay. Just multiply 6 times 20,000, 6 times 25. And again, you see that if you're not real close to that $20,000 per month per employee in collections, you're going to find that your overhead is really bad. And if you follow some of the things I'd written during the pandemic, we were writing about the pandemic in February, but I started thinking about when we came back and they closed us in March, I was already thinking about that. And I'm saying, look, don't hire people back unless you're getting at least $20,000 of production per employee, so that you can actually have a do-over in the overhead column and actually get those numbers that create E and EBITDA earnings. Okay. Not just, a sparse paycheck for you. Okay. I talked to a doctor not an hour before this who had opened a practice in let's see, it was January of 2020. And then the doctor next door, an older doctor, was injured and he bought that practice too. And then 2 weeks later, they closed. He's in California for almost 3 months and he hasn't gotten a paycheck and he's had to use his savings just to keep afloat. Okay. So what gives value? Long-term consistent performance and no weak links. When in staff, I want to know that I have long-standing staff and that, you kind of culled out all the weak people in your staff. And I was asking this young doctor in that phone call an hour ago. I said, is there anybody here? I see 10 employees. Is there anybody here that one of them didn't show up on Monday that you'd be disappointed? Yeah, there's a couple that I wouldn't be disappointed about. I said, why do you still have them? Because you're paying over 51% in staff salaries when it should be 25 or less. Okay. State-of-the-art facility in curb appeal. Now, state-of-the-art facility doesn't mean what you might think it means. It needs to be updated, fresh, clean, spotless, smells good, nice location, everything's appealing, not necessarily just 3D cone beams from a clinical standpoint, but the curb appeal. If a doctor walks up to that office and it's in a bad neighborhood or the shrubbery looks crappy or they can't even see a sign, all of those things affect the value. And it's certainly in the eye of a consumer, if you're growing your practice and can't see the deal, there's no parking, they got to walk a long way, you don't even show up on a Google map search. All of those will matter. Okay. An internal referral percentage. I think that's the most important percentage we could look at. And again, most softwares don't even follow that. You have to do it by hand. But most doctors don't even look at it. But if you're not getting at least a 50% direct referral rate, that's a real bad signal about paying goodwill in a purchase, because part of it, you have to allocate the sale to goodwill, supplies and equipment, non-compete, accounts receivable. The selling doctor is going to want as much in goodwill as possible, maybe 80, 85%. But if they've got only like 10 or 15% direct referral rate, there's hardly any goodwill in that practice. We talked about location, but overhead. Okay, this is one of the big things, because when you talk about EBITDA and you're talking about multiples of net, then your overhead has to be reasonable. And I would say 90% of the practices that I see, their overheads are terrible. And so they need to be well below. If you were even thinking about an associate, I would not entertain that unless my overhead was less than 63%. I would rather it be 55 or somewhere between 50 and 60, but certainly not more than 63%. If I were going to open a second office, you need to tip a mirror up and take a hard look here. If you can't meet these benchmarks for what creates value in a purchase or value in a growing practice like this overhead number, don't go open another office. It'll bring you to your knees. So again, most doctors assume that profit and loss statement is profit and loss. It is not. It does not have debt payments in it. It's just a GAAP document, a generally accepted accounting principle document that really takes track of things that have tax consequences. And so a lot of doctors go, well, I'm netting this much. How come I don't have any money? Well, that's because you haven't subtracted your debt service. It's not in there. Okay. So these are just benchmarks that you should search for. If I was going to include under staff compensation, and when I say compensation, I mean anything at all that you're spending on staff. Okay. Benefits, uniforms, workman's comp, someone to find you a staff person, anything. I even put my attorney and lawyer in there. If I'm going to put them in there, I'll raise that to 27%. But you have to understand, when you're outsourcing certain services in your practice, you've hired a part-time person to do that. You need to put that under staff compensation. So in that chapter, in the super general dental practice, it goes over each one of these in detail, but this will give you a target area. And all of your profit and loss statement will fit in this or in the 7th category, which would be money spent on you. Okay. Now, what makes it worth more? I would have to say that your hygiene department brings the number one value to a sale of a practice. Now, let's go back to that boutique practice. You'll notice that they generally only have about 7 to 15 new patients a month. Okay, half of what an average practice would have. So every month, they're hoping and praying and wishing that they get 2 or 3 people to say yes to really, really big cases. If they can do that day in, day out, awesome, okay? But when the economy goes bad, the pandemic, guess who goes first? They do. But one of the things that does not make it valuable is that when you buy a normal practice, just a GP practice, not the ones on the edges, but when you buy it, they should have at least a third of the production coming through hygiene. And for most practices, most of the patients will actually bond to that hygienist. And it is the greatest indicator of what are things will come from this if you have a really strong hygiene department. Now, they should produce at least 3 times what they're paid. And that's getting harder and harder because for decades, we've been paying hygienists. We give them a cost of living raise every year. We give them a longevity-based raise. None of these make sense, okay? And at the same time, we've had managed care be a greater and greater part of our practices. And if we look at how they discount fees on the insurance, they discount far deeper on the hygiene production side than they do on your clinical side. So it may average out to be, say, 25 to 35% of, adjustments for, being in network. But I guarantee you for hygiene, it's at least 50, maybe more. And so the hygienists have been doing the same thing they've been doing, yet what they bring in, you pay them more than you're actually netting out of their service. So this is a huge thing. If you haven't read the articles that I've written on hygiene, changing the commission, go to our website. There's a quick link to that. And there's 6 or 7 of them in a row that detail this, but we need to get our handle on it. In fact, I would suggest that you run a production by provider for 2020. Okay, doesn't matter you were off 2 or 3 months, just production. And then what you have your CPA give you the total pay for those hygienists, and then divide the production, the big number, the net adjusted production, into their pay, and it converts that hourly pay to a percentage. You may be really surprised when you find out you're paying your hygienist 58% of what they do or 60%. Okay. I mean, you wouldn't pay your associate that, would you? Okay, 100% collection rate. 98% is an old term, but we used to carry the balances and stuff. You can easily do over 100% if you're encouraging prepayment. You're using outside lending agencies. It has to be structured well, but it's doable. Okay, and so one thing to remember is what is 1% of what you do in $1 million practice? 1% is $10,000. So if you're collecting 98, you're leaving 20 grand on the table. If your hygienists aren't doing 33% of your collections, they're only doing 25. At 10, you're leaving about $80,000 on the table. Okay, this is what makes value. This is what makes a great practice. Okay, and recall. I probably should have put 80%. I should think that you should put 100%. But it's never been an office that I walk into and ask a hygienist, do you pre-book patients after a cleaning appointment for their recall? And they go, absolutely. And I say, do you do 50%, 60, 70? Oh, no, way over 90%. And then I'll just take the computer and flip over sometime within 6 months. Okay, out 3 or 4 months. And I flip it around and I show them the schedule, because the only thing there is going to be hygiene appointments. And there's 4 people scheduled. So what happened here? Seems like you did 50%. Okay, you flip over and you see it's common for it to be 40% pre-booked in the future. That's killing your practices. When we talk about, death by, paper cuts, attrition, patients moving, not following through on pre-booking them for things like that, not following up on case presentations. So, this attrition rate is huge. And most offices could probably increase their collections in a single year just by going back and dotting some I's and crossing some T's. Okay. So what makes it worth more? Historic growth. They're going to look back 3 years and look. So you can't wait till the last minute if you're going to sell a practice or are going to look at it. You need to see growth. It needs to be at least 10% a year. Lack of uncertainty creates work. I mean, same thing in your own practices. I mean, is the economy doing well? Are we going through a pandemic? What kind of competition do I have? I mean, if you've been in the same location 10 or 15 years, you're probably in the wrong location. It no longer had the benefits it once had. You no longer have that edge you had when you're willing to do whatever it takes. So again, you're constantly looking at your situation, constantly tipping that mirror up and looking at it. You just can't assume anything. Now, from a buyer's perspective, and I'm a buyer, okay, if I'm buying practicing, I don't want a great practice. The DSO may want them, but I don't, because I'm smarter than a DSO. What I want is a practice where I see an upside. Okay, you might pay $300,000 or $400,000 for a practice. The doctor's in his 70s. He works 2 or 3 days a week. He has to turn away people every day. He's got a great location, so I can buy the real estate too. But they're not in network for insurance, but they're sitting in a demographic where it's 80% insurance. Well, I could do that. They don't do endo, they don't do implants, they don't do oral surgery, they don't do whatever it is. I could do that. That's an upside for me. Their hours aren't consumer driven. I could work Fridays, I could work Saturdays. I mean, that's an upside for me. The range of patients, age wise, right? I could do that. Their fees are below average. I can adjust that. And sometimes they even have owner financing. It's the upside that makes practices valuable to a buyer. Now, that's an educated buyer, not the normal buyer. Okay. So what do you do if you're trying to move towards making this better? Well, you got to clean up your numbers. Now, that means normalizing it. In other words, restructuring your P&Ls into those 7 categories. And it tells how to do that in that book. Make sure that, if you've got a storage unit that you write off to the office and you're storing your boat in it, which is fine, put that down under, owner contributions down on the 7th category. Be honest with yourself. Now, again, you can still write it off. We're not changing that. You can just tell your CPA to tough it out. He can figure it out at the end of the year. It hasn't, all of the categories are still there. We've just moved them around so that you have a document that you don't get 3 months later. You've got your own QuickBooks. You can look at it every day, and you should look at it every week, and you should. You can look at it at a time where you can make positive impacts on your productivity and profitability by acting quickly. Okay. Now, what can you do, to make it, you could go out and solicit more patients. We need to see that the new patients is trending up. Okay. If there is a capacity problem, like one of the operatories doesn't work, fix the capacity problem. If you'll notice when you're looking at Max, there's on his left side, on your right side, I can see an aquarium over there. And I was in there one time, and he has a huge aquarium. He's got several aquariums, but he's got a huge aquarium. But I said, well, can you get a shark? And he goes, well, yeah. You can get a great white shark and put in there, if it weren't protected. But you could put it in there when he's a little tadpole or whatever he is, when he's little. But he'll never grow over about 7 or 8 inches because of the capacity of the aquarium. You take and put in the ocean, he could grow 17, 20 feet. Okay. So a lot of times doctors, we're talking to them about, what they could do to improve their practice. Sometimes it's a capacity problem. They don't have the right number of employees. They don't have the right number of employees in the right positions. They don't have that extra operatory that they need every day to do same-day dentistry and stuff like that. So you've got to address your capacity problems. You got to plan for the future. Okay. It's amazing when I project out, and we just happen to be doing this near the front of the year, the first quarter, than the end. But a lot of doctors look at it. We get lots of calls in November because they're going, holy cow, this isn't turning out real good. But again, you do your P&Ls where you've got this year, you've also got last year, and you've got the percentages and what goes is with just in the setup of it, so that you're comparing this year to last year, and that you've got this 10 or 15% growth, you can start relaxing and the stress goes away. You can't just stop grinding it out, but you can relax knowing that what you're doing is making a huge difference in the results. You've got to embrace consumerism. And again, I can't overemphasize how doctors who used to be the it doctor are no longer, because they failed to adapt to an ever-changing community of consumers that define what they want. Okay, you try to give them something they don't want. I mean, it'd be like you're a chef and you're going to open a restaurant between 2 in the afternoon and 5, and you try to explain to the chef that, well, why would you do that? Well, I'm the most famous French chef there is, and people will come. You know, I said, well, they don't get hungry at 2 to 5, and they're in denial. Okay, so you've got to look at consumerism. You've got to transform your burn rate. Whether you're just starting out or, you know, you've got to be saving your money. If you look at, you know, actuarial tables or people that advise people how much they should save, it used to be around 10%. Then they moved to 12. Now it's at 14% for the average person to be able to retire at some point. Dentist is at 20%. And that means you don't successfully end 3 marriages, and you don't go for the wall on every stupid investment. You know, you make your plan A your practice, and you turn it into the golden goose here. Okay. Now I've got a prediction. I think that when we talk about the value of a practice, and we talk about how to grow a practice, and we talk about, you know, expanding practices, that, you know, the dentists that are the most invested in the old solo practice model, as if solo was a destination. It's not. I mean, if we sat here and we defined what a great practice looked like, we turn on all the mics, everybody gets to talk, and you know, we just start listening. What makes it would be a certain number of new patients. I guarantee it'd be more than an average practice number. It would have, you know, longevity of patients. Everybody loves you. There's patients that want really comprehensive dentistry, and they can afford it. You know, you would take a long list. Okay, if you had a practice like that, it couldn't stay a solo practice. I mean, you know, odds are you would have more patients coming in. If you did, eventually you'd outgrow one hygienist, and then you'd have 2, then you have 3, then you couldn't check them all. Then you'd have to have another doctor. So a solo practice is not a destination. Mainstream dental practices are the greatest risk. And as I look out and hear all these sob stories, I mean, I know I probably talk to 3 or 4 doctors I am never going to meet every day. And I try to help them over the phone, but it's amazing. I mean, the good thing about it, when I hang up the phone, I really, as sorry as I feel for them, as much as I like to help them, I am so happy I'm not them. I mean, it's like, it's amazing how they got so deep before they decided to start acting to get themselves out. So multiple doctor offices. Now, and again, I'm not talking about DSOs. They would be under that, obviously, but I'm just talking about offices with more than one dentist are growing 20% a year, and solo practices are decreasing 70%. We're seeing a trend that to give patients a wider range of services to a wider range of age during consumer hours, a solo dentist can't do that. Okay. Now, God bless you if you can, but I mean, I'm talking about working, you know, 32 hours a week and being able to do that. It just is almost impossible. Okay. As much as I hate to admit it to patients, price has always been a factor with patients. We blame it on insurance now, but again, it's that price sensitivity. And during this pandemic, I would say consumers in general, especially dental and you know, medical type of consumers, have educated themselves through the years, through the decades, and certainly in the last year, and their expectations are higher than they ever were. And most doctors aren't ready to have a judgmental patient who's concerned about health, and they're educated about their insurance and stuff. We haven't kept up with that. Dentistry has always been about relationships. Okay. So I'm thinking that the surviving independent dentists, which I totally believe in, they're going to have 6 to 8 ops. It's not going to be 6. It's going to be closer to 8. It's not going to be 20. Okay. They're going to be multiple doctors with twice the number of hygienists as doctor hours. So we had 2 doctors, there'd be 4 hygienists. Okay. We had 4 hygienists. You're going to need about 4 times what an average practice would have, preferably more than that, but about 120 new patients, a wider range of services. In other words, I think every dentist should be able to do oral surgery, do molar endo, place implants, whatever. If you can't, certainly don't do it. But I think that's a worthy goal. I mean, it's always sad when I talk to doctors that tell me how bad things are. And I went, well, now, do you do any endo? No, I don't do any endo. Do you work on kids? No, I don't work on kids at all. And I said, well, do you like to do like full mouth? No, I like single crowns and stuff like that and fillings. I said, well, do you do any ortho or, like this? No. I mean, I'm sorry. If we put a picture and a description of a dentist, it's going to have those services underneath it. And so practices that decide, I am just not going to embrace change. I'm not going to improve my services and the wider range of patients I can reach. They're going to suffer. They're not going to survive. Okay. The ones that will know their key performance indicators are their key practice indicators for our purposes, right? I mean, we're talking about a dental practice. What are those numbers that we need to follow? Okay. And I've already listed them for you. They embrace consumerism. I mean, not that, embrace consumerism doesn't mean that you lower the level of quality. It means that you look at your services, you look at your location, you look at how you deal with insurance. And patients are looking for kind of a one-stop shop. I mean, that's why you see corporations bringing in specialists or having the services for kids and adults in their practices. So, Max, I'm going to stop in my screen and hopefully you'll come back on here. So there we go. That work okay?
Seemed to work fine. I would just say, just to piggyback on what Mike was just saying right there at the end, a couple of things he said really kind of naturally dovetail together. If you're the doctor that doesn't like doing endo and doesn't like seeing kids and hasn't learned how to do implants and, the other things that he mentioned, sometimes you can correct that within your practice by bringing in another doctor. If you don't like to do endo or see kids and you're looking to bring in another doctor, that should be at the very top of the list, right? That they need to be able to do all the endo and see all the kids. And it's also a great thing to market, is that we love to see your kids, right? Because then that gets the parents, and if the parents come, then the grandparents come, and that's just the way it works.
Another thing, Max, is that when we're hiring doctors, our initial, and someone sent me a question, I would prefer, I mean, this is fine, somebody of the same faith that I am, a Christian doctor, that likes to hunt and fish and do the things I like to do. Okay, in a way, that's the wrong way to look at it. I mean, not that I wouldn't like to have somebody in the same faith, but I'm just, we're really looking for somebody who doesn't think exactly like us, because we're just going to get a clone and we'll divide the patients we have in half. I want somebody that would encourage a wider range of patients to come, and as Max said, a wider range of services. And so it's somebody that not only compliments me, but also compensates for me if there's something I can't or won't do. And that way we both grow and make a bunch of money. I think this, let me say one other thing, Max, right before you wind up here. Start to what you're saying. I right before we got on, I wrote these down real quick because I've heard this over and over, and I know you can add to this, but I truly believe that we can recalibrate and reset your ability to see and act on new information and help you grow consistently. But I hear excuses all the time. We'll suggest something, people say, I'll do whatever you say, Mike, I'm desperate, I'll do it. And I'll tell them what to do, and they'll go, why, let me rephrase that. I will do anything but that, okay? Anything else I'll do. But I hear, it's different where I practice. You can't find good staff here. People won't accept that. We tried that, it doesn't work. All staff are just lazy. That's why, we had one doctor that just was going to put a school in there because he couldn't keep a staff person more than about 4 months. All associates are incompetent and lazy. Millennials are worthless. My location really doesn't matter. That won't work here. There's too much competition. I already do that. Everybody already loves me. Okay. That's why you don't have any patients, right? Okay. You can't make a profit being in network. Okay. I think you've got a practice that does okay, right, Max? In network on insurance?
They just had their best month ever in March.
And it was over $50 a month, I bet.
Yeah.
It's in the millions and millions, okay, in a month.
It's probably
okay?
over $50 a minute.
Yeah, okay. I only want to do fee for service practice. Staff never stay very long. Saturdays don't work. Postcards don't work. We don't have to market our practice. It's impossible to have an overhead of below 60%. All of those are lies. Okay, that's not true. So
that's one of those things I'd put under the category is if somebody's doing it, it's possible to do.
It's possible. So
and all those things that he just mentioned, we can point you to doctors that are doing all those things and more. So it's what you're willing to do. One other thing I was going to say is, maybe EBITDA is a foreign term to some people, right? It's EBITDA, earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, amortization, right? The corporate entities, the DSOs, they want to filter all that stuff out because they don't care what your depreciation schedule is. They don't care what the interest rate on your note is. They don't care about any of that. That's why they want to set all of that aside. It's all just accounting games anyway, right? But if you don't take those things out, you are not really seeing profit. Just like Mike said, you're not really seeing profit without including whatever you're paying yourself. Because all of those entities that I know of, if you sell to them, they're going to require you to stay for a period of time and work, and they're going to pay you a percentage of what you produce and collect.
And right? Heartland's 25%.
Heartland's nearly always been 25%. I think a few people are successful at negotiating around that. And a few people are successful at negotiating, a shorter term of service that they have to stay employed there. The real trick is that you agree to stay, but they don't necessarily agree to keep you. So they can turn you loose at any time. But anyway, they don't really care about all of that stuff. They want to know the true profit of the practice. And like Mike said, the bottom line is they know that they can improve on that, but they still want to know what it is today, because that's how they're going to arrive at the kind of offer they make you for the practice. So I'm going to hit in a second here, I'm going to allow everybody to unmute themselves. So I would ask you, to please, if you want to ask a question, unmute yourself, ask your question, and then maybe remute yourself, because if this many people on here, if a lot of people.
Max, can all say too, if you don't want to talk, and you have a question, you could put it in the chat, and then Max could tell me. If you were embarrassed to ask a question, didn't want to know that you were asking that, just send it in and let Max just ask me. I'll see if I can answer it. So Scott Phelps doesn't think I can answer it. Okay. We'll see.
All right, so I'm going to hit that now. So you can now unmute yourself and ask a question. But here's one that everybody probably saw because it just popped up. One of the issues we have is finding a doctor to work that can get out of their own way, in quotes. New docs get out of school knowing next to nothing and skills are very limited. How should the compensation package reflect this for hiring a new doctor?
Right. Okay, well, the compensation package is generally a percentage of what they make. We do it incorrectly to start with. It should be an algorithm. And this goes back to the value of a practice. They said, if you've got like a 70% overhead, and I was going to hire Chris Waters over here. And I said, Scott, you're the guy. I want you to be my associate. But I got to make at least 5%, preferably 10% your work. I mean, I've got to make a profit on what you do. That sounds fair, doesn't it? And they go, yeah. Okay, when I overhead 70%, I can pay you 20 to 25%. There is a point at which you can't hire people for a certain percentage, but unless your overhead is low enough that you have some latitude. So I haven't found that good doctors are hard to find. They're only about 4 or 5% of the graduates. And so you have to figure out a way to get in front of that, less than 10% of the people that graduate. Some of them have even worked in various jobs. One of the things I ask doctors is about their parents. What did your parents do? They owned a grocery store. I worked in the grocery store. Okay, I like that because they know good times, bad times. But I think a lot of this is our fault. Anytime I had a staff person leave or a patient request change of records, I did an exit interview. You'll learn so much from that. But when we start out paying doctors, you've got to be ready. We paid 25%. I think that's right, Max, to our associates. All of our associates became partners within 6 to 12 months, or they went home. They didn't work out. We were very specific about how we engineered the interview, very specific about making sure the staff was involved in the hiring process, and they got final say, because if you don't have the staff behind that doctor, they won't perform. But I could turn the spigot up on the new patients at a moment's notice. I could double it easily. I mean, we could regulate that. Most of you can't do that. So a doctor coming to my practice might take $300,000, $400,000 home the first year at 25%, or a lot more than they can make getting 30 somewhere else. So again, we're in competition now with corporations, and their pay packages are much stronger than most doctors are willing to offer. And so one of the things we do in our associate agreement that most corporations don't is we ramp the percentage. Okay. We create a system that creates pain for in the pay system if they don't perform. Okay. Now we do great job onboarding them. We know what their talents, where they lie, and we make sure we give them the patients they need. And we generally give them the best assistant we've got, because generally they can raise them up pretty good. But by doing this, the first 20, 25,000 they produce in a month, you lose money on them. So I might pay maybe 25% on the first 20, 25,000. And then it would go up to maybe 30 when they get up to 60, 70, 80,000. And then there might be another bump in there, but we ramp it. And I can show you how that works in a associate contract, but I think that's a wise way to approach it. But far too many doctors hire them. They think they onboard them, but there is a very specific way of tutelage and oversight. And we called the patients after the doctor worked on them. Had the assistant call, even though I had the doctor call and check. I checked their impressions. I'm very non-assertive. I can pretend to be assertive with you guys, but I am non-assertive, and I don't want to bump up, in a collision with somebody. So I just found that it was a lot easier to start early and be proactive. And so I sat down with them and I showed them a burr block, and I said, this is your burr block until you can prove to me that you can prep a tooth better than I can, or you have something better and we both agree, I'll buy it, but this is what you're going to use. Prep that tooth, prep all 5 of these, and let me see what you can do. And then I look at the impressions, and then I trimmed my dies for 40 years. On every crown I did, I trimmed my dies. Because I was a lab technician in the end of high school and college, and paid my way through dental school being a lab technician. Those things were important to me. So oftentimes we hire them, and then we just assume they're going to do okay because they have a learner's permit. Gordon Christensen said, when you graduate from dental school, you're just barely not dangerous. And so I take them on that and assume that they're not going to be very good at what they do. And we set up a system that improves on that. And I'm not going to pay full fare to teach them how to practice dentistry. So you might want to limit the age group that you invite in. I generally looking for somebody that's been out at least 2 years. I won't hire somebody that's been out 5 years working as an employee. They're the wrong doctor. If you work for somebody as an employee for 5 or 6 or 7 years, you don't have a fire in your belly. That's not the type of person I need in my practice. So did that touch on it a little bit, Max?
Yeah, here's another one. So could you please go over strategies to bring a practice from survival phase on your chart to growing phase? You know, so there are practices that get stuck in all of these phases.
Yeah,
right?
and again, it's not so much just taking your rectal temperature to do that. It's amazing the different ways people tend to get themselves. They think this I'm just barely at survival is the problem, or they think, well, I just need more new patients. And when we start looking at it, it's not the fact that you need more new patients. It's that the patients that you see you don't like you, or they don't like your systems or your hours, the fact you're out of network or something. So again, increasing new patients sometimes isn't more external marketing. It's taking and actually taking care of the people you got, or it might be case presentation and how we template that and stuff. We partner with our staff so that by the time I walk into an operatory, there's a consensus of what the patient wants. We know their dental IQ, we know their budget, and so it's kind of a done deal. And so I don't have permission to talk. The hygienist does, or the assistant with an emergency patient, and they know their job, and they are trying to get the patient to want what they need. And they do an incredible job. When you hold hands, it's like dancing. I don't dance very well, but if I could dance with, Jeff Chu, and we could probably make it work, but we'd be stepping on each other's toes. But if we did that 8 hours a day, we get pretty damn good at that. I mean, it's partnering with the staff that makes a big difference when we're embracing a patient to show up, pay for their treatment, and refer everybody they know. I mean, that's what we're shooting for. And it takes that collaboration of long-term staff to do that. And again, one of the things that I offer every doctor every time I write an article, I put my cell phone number down there and my personal email. Summit's sitting on there, I don't think. And I said, I'm inviting you to call me. Scott, I was in your office. Phelps, wake up. Okay. You didn't pay me any. It's like I'm more than happy to help you. And so one of the things we need to determine what's wrong is an adequate diagnostic set of, notes. One is we have a growth analysis sheet. 2 would be a profit and loss statement for 12 months. The 3rd would be a schedule. I pretty well can tell you exactly what's wrong in that practice, what to do, just from those 3 things. So whoever asks that, the next article you get at the bottom, email me or call me, I'll send it to you, and then we'll just talk. And we'll talk for, hours, whatever it takes so you understand what you can do to fix it. I'll tell you how to fix it.
Anybody else got a question? Speak up.
Or a comment. Or you just want to shoot the bull.
Be like the preacher says at the wedding, speak now or forever hold your peace.
Okay. If you don't have a question, let me go back to my first premise. I want to do a series of these through the part of the year. Okay. Till I get tired of doing it. About an hour and a half for each one. I want your feedback on topics, be detailed, of what, if you had a magic wand and you wanted to know everything you could about that one topic, what would that be? Or if you have 5, that's fine too. So if you could either put that into a chat box, or you could email me or email Max, and then I will put together, based on the input that you do, on doing this again in about 3 or 4 weeks. And we can cover everything possible, as deep as you want to go, but you've got to be specific. The more specific you are, the deeper I have to go to be able to get this, get this information to you. So.
Oh, here's one you can talk on for a while. What's the best way to compensate hygiene given the lower reimbursements from insurance?
Well, it's going to be a commission, I would do this. I already mentioned it, but do a production by provider for 2020 or the last, year. Okay, full year. Okay, big number. Okay, net adjusted production, not gross production, net adjusted production. All your software should be set to net adjusted production. Okay, then get the CPA to give you the pay for that person, each of the hygienists, and then just divide the big number into the small one. It'll convert that. Let's say they made $50,000 and you divide the $200,000 they did, they'll give me the percentage that they're paid. Okay. Now, if it's, 25 to maybe 32%, I probably wouldn't do much. I still want to go on commission, but it's not desperate. But you're going to find it's going to be well over 40%, and some worse than others. Most hygiene departments struggle because they think every patient needs 60 minutes for a recall. I've never seen a patient that needed 60 minutes. I've seen 62 minutes and 41 and 55 and 50, but not exactly 60. I mean, you could raise the production in your hygiene department by 31% if you just went from 60 minutes to 50 minutes. That gives you, 100 and whatever it is minutes, a day, enough for 2 more patients. And you'll increase your production by 31%. But when you go in commission, the ripple effect and the trick in being a good leader and a good manager is that you create a game that has benefits for the player, but it also creates the perfect result for you. So again, I can come up with a way to pay them on a percentage that will encourage them. And what happens, the ripple effect is cancellations and no-shows go away in hygiene completely. You have trouble getting a hygienist to pitch in and get people to work, be a regular staff person, part of the team, that goes away. They know who's going to show up late every time. So may double book them themselves. I mean, they start engineering your schedule just like you did. When you first got out and put on that whatever it takes t-shirt, you do whatever it took anytime you needed to do it. And you would do it in a way that so you could pay your bills. Okay. I mean, you learn to do this. And when you start doing this, now the hygienist has taken on the accountability of what their job yields. So part of this, as as I say, you can go online, right, Max? Isn't there a quick, link to the articles that I've written?
Yes, I'm gonna show that right now.
Okay. Well, because I try to write this down. I don't do a really good job writing because I write like I talk. But when you question me, I tend to do better at it.
All right, there's the homepage of our website. Can you see it?
Yeah, I can see it.
Everybody see it? This last little thing in the string there.
On the toolbar there. Okay.
On the toolbar is blog. There are, they go back sequentially. Those are March, those are February, blah, blah, blah. They go back years. There's maybe 600 on here now. Here's the key, okay? The little search box right here. If you go in there and say you're interested in setting up a really comprehensive bonus plan for your office, you hit search, and all of these are articles that are specific to bonus, or it mentions the bonus somewhere in there. And you're going to find like this, there are pages and pages and pages of them.
So my suggestion is if you could go back and look at the topic you're interested in, then research your situation and then call me. You're going to have really good questions.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, it helps me because oftentimes people will call and I'm going, okay, let me tell you the answer in broad deals, but let me send you something, read it, and then call me back. And then it'll be a better conversation because it's like going down, a long road that's dimly lit and you go halfway down. I can now see, you can now see better at what the problem is. But again, all of these are fixable. Everything is fixable.
I got a few more questions that have popped through here. I don't know if
Okay.
everybody's seeing them or not, but if you can maybe give because we're an hour and 22 minutes in here. So give an abbreviated version of this, and then we'll include this in more detail next month or, whenever we do this again. How and where do you recruit dentists?
Okay. There are electronic bulletin boards in every dental school. Now, not just recent graduates, but people who graduated 5 years from there always go back and look there. They cost nothing to do. And don't limit your search to just your state. Okay. Now, another way to do it is that if you're in an open record state, and there are 39 open record states, okay, you can go online and there is a spreadsheet. I mean, the list of doctors' name like Abbott, Abernathy, and it'll have my name, my office address, and then any state board actions, and then when my license was issued. So in a way, you could kind of tell. You could arrange that by zip code. You could arrange it by their, like they've been out for at least 2 years to 4 years, and then send them a letter. Okay. I mean, it's so unusual for somebody to get a letter as opposed to digital marketing for jobs. It's surprising how well it works. Okay. Because what you're doing in this is you're trying to get a telephone call, and the traditional methods of doing it, I'd ask Shine, Patterson, my supplier. They have associates currently working that aren't happy, looking for new jobs all the time. I mean, there's a million ways to do it. I did write a book about this though. Okay. So it's called The Roadmap, but it lists that. Okay. And I'm in the process. I finished rewriting it already and added, probably 60 pages just on DSOs and stuff. So, but that I'll have that redone here, anytime I want to do that. But those are a couple, 3 ways. Certainly you can try the traditional, Facebook, Craigslist, stuff like that. But what I always wanted to do is get the best candidate I could find. So it minimized the time I spent. And then if you can pre-qualify them that let me send you this and have them fill it out, then you can usually dumb it down. And then it's a whole process of how I do the interviews and stuff. So.
All right, next one. There's no quick answer to this, but what needs to give specifics on what needs to be done 3 to 5 years before selling/retirement.
Okay, yeah. I mean, what we talked about today would probably fit that. I would say if you're thinking about getting out, you're trying to position your practice so it's attractive to a buyer, and it spends as much profit as you can out, and you are diminishing or eliminating all debt. And about 2 years out, I would try to live on my projected income. In other words, not instead of living on what you could make, save more, and then see if you can live on a diminished income that you're expecting. And I would expect, maybe a 5% return after taxes, something like that, and see if you can live on it. So you get used to that. Some doctors decide, well, I'm going to retire in practice, or I'm going to keep working a little bit, but I'm not going to work much. We had one doctor that just was burned out, and he really couldn't afford to hire us. He couldn't afford, to retire. And so I had suggested to him that, yeah, let's go sell this, but keep 2% of the practice. And then I want you to work 4 days a week. He liked to do, this was back when Invisalign first came out. He liked to do Invisalign and nobody was doing it. I said, I want you to work a Monday and a Friday, then take 2 weeks off, and then work a Monday and a Friday. Okay. I mean, isn't retirement having the time and the money to do whatever you want to do? Now, he was burned out. He'd been working 4 or 5 days a week and not making much traction. His assistant retired. He paid her cash so she could go out to eat and buy new dresses and stuff like that. But he netted over $100,000 a year every year after that, and continued to work for 10 years. So he never had to touch his retirement savings. I mean, he didn't have much, but there's not a black and white answer to everything. But getting ready is to get mentally ready. You can't just sell. You have to transition from one thing to another. You have to go, ideally, from success to significance. I mean, what's your next? What's your next significant thing? And come up with something that excites you. Okay. It just doesn't work if you don't do that.
And then the next one says, give some formulas for straightforward, easy calculations for team bonuses. What I just showed you, is the best way to do that, you know, and then like Mike said, read all of that and then get in touch with us if you have more specific questions. But I mean, we've written so much stuff on bonuses that I'd be surprised if you couldn't find 98% of what you're hoping for right there. You know, the biggest thing is that it has to be arranged so that it's a win-win scenario. If you hate writing and giving out the checks, you're going to stop it. And odds are that most of the people that have worked for you or that are working for you now have worked somewhere else where they were promised the moon and only got the cheese. You know, there's so many bad bonus plans out there that a lot of times if you say, oh, we're going to start this bonus, it's going to be great, they're just going to laugh. But this one, you know, I've seen it work in offices for over 20 years.
And they haven't had to adjust it. Yeah.
They haven't had to adjust it. Yeah, it just works and it keeps working. So my answer to that question is go there first, and then if you still have questions, let us know.
And then if you do have a question, be sure you send us a P&L.
Yeah.
Because, you know, your overhead has to be part of the calculation of and I hate calling a bonus plan, it's really profit sharing. It has to be part of that to make this work. Literally, you can pay your staff more in the form of profit sharing and spend less as a percentage of your collections on staff. That's when it's a win-win for both of you. You're paying them more and more money, yet what you take out of your collections, that percentage drops down. It goes from 30 down to 27, down to 25. And I mean, that's when it's a win-win deal. And you should be really happy to write those checks. I wrote paid on the 1st and the 15th, but I paid that bonus check on the 10th. It was a separate check. I wanted to understand that this was for above and beyond the call of duty. They earned every penny of it. So it makes a big difference.
Plus, if you give it to them in a separate check like that, they don't have to tell their husbands, who might just either turn it all into Jack Daniels or go to the racetrack and bet it all away. And, you know, they want to use some of that money on themselves, or, you know, trust me, I've seen all kinds of scenarios in 30 years of doing this. Some of them are buying shoes for their kids because their deadbeat husbands.
We had several staff people said, Dr. Abernathy, you probably didn't know this, but our husbands, I mean, you know, when you have staff that stay 15 years, average stay 14.7 years, half of them have gotten remarried. I mean, I don't even know what their new last name is. I know what their first name and their maiden name or their married name was when they started working. But they said, we never told our husbands that we got a bonus check. I put that in a trust, or I put that in an account. And when we divorced, he never asked a word about it because he didn't know. Okay. That paid for our kids to go to college. That paid for, you know, all those things. So that's gratifying to hear that by sharing the profits, you get partners in your practice. It's not just, you know, people that worked at, not a group of people, it's a team. It's a commitment, not just compliance to what you want done. It makes a huge difference.
Yeah. One more, we may need to make this the last one. Time's getting away here. When somebody's transitioning out toward the end of this year, when's the best time to tell the staff and the patients? Since the contract is being written, the associate who's buying the practice, because he knows he doesn't want to do it till the contract is signed, sealed, and delivered. Just, you know, general advice.
I think it's kind of I think it's funny that, you know, you hire staff, you know, you're not supposed to talk about paychecks, and you give somebody a $25 raise. It takes about 3 hours for everybody to know. Most staff have an idea that something's going on, but you're right. Until that check is signed, I might offer to stay on for free for maybe a month or 10 days or so to help the doctor and help the staff and stuff. But again, most doctors are worried about it'll get out to the patients and they won't have anything to sell. So yeah, I would wait till the last moment. I'm sorry. You know, most of us, when we sell, we have several things in mind. One is they want a legacy for the patients. They want a legacy for their trusted employees. And they want to be able to come back there and have their own dentistry done. You know, they want it to be a win-win deal. I hate to say this, but you have no control over that. And, when it comes to that point and you sell it, certainly I'm hoping, pray that that happens for you. But 90% of staff are gone from a practice after the first year. And, it doesn't work out that way, that you can guarantee legacies that way. So basically, you're looking for somebody where the check clears. If they can fog a mirror and the check clears, that's your person. Now, granted, you're going to do due diligence and you're going to try to get the best person you can find, but truly, once they buy it, everything changes. And again, that book on Roadmap really talks in detail about that.
Maybe you could send him the draft, your rewritten draft.
Oh, my deal. I've added that.
And let him edit and correct all your typos like I
Okay, there you go. Instead of you.
Yeah, instead of me.
Yeah, I'll read something. I write something every week, at least every week, and so I'll send it to Max. And so somebody will say, "Can I get a copy of that?" And yeah, but I don't know whether Max changed the title. It's like he corrects all my spelling. So I don't know how it ends up. So sometimes I can't find it because it's not the title that I put on it originally. So anyway, I guess I just go to the website and just use that search deal.
Yeah.
I'll be able to find those articles I write. So,
yep.
Hey, thanks everybody for being here. I am humbled that you people would show up. And I know the situations. I know your situation, Scott. Do you think I haven't followed you? I do. I know things. I keep up with you guys. I'm hoping that you will.
He's not listening to you. He's listening to Led Zeppelin.
Yeah. Well, at least it's not Baylor beating, it wasn't the night of, because I wasn't thinking about that when not many people showing up. But if you like the articles, you like anything we've done, please send us some ideas about areas in your practice that you would really like to take a deep dive on. Because if we can get together 10 people, I'll do this. And if it gets to be 10 people, we'll just leave the mics open and we'll just talk and do it all. So, but send us those suggestions, because it's really going to help us fine tune what we talk about.
Yeah, and I'll end with a little story here. Mike has this paranoia that we'll do something like this and nobody will show up. And you might think that's weird, but that's really legitimate. The first time he spoke as a quote dental speaker, a big lab down in Houston invited him to come down, and they have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of
300 offices.
Yeah, just right there in Houston, 300 offices. So this is all planned. They've got this giant room, this really nice hotel. We get there the night before, we look around, and it's this huge room, which is kind of intimidating. There must have been 300-400 chairs in there. And, if you've never spoken in front of a crowd, that's going to intimidate you, right? So we get there bright and early the next morning. Mike's so nervous he can't eat, and just we get there, and the lab owner is there, and the sales guy's there. I think even some
they're going to film the whole thing.
Were there. They had a film crew there to film the whole thing. One doctor shows up. It seems that nobody remembered that was opening day of deer season in that whole part of Texas. And we had one doctor, and Mike did his entire presentation, which they did film for one doctor. He had a private show.
And then I jumped off the stage and ran down. Let's go get some lunch, because I was afraid he's going to leave at lunch, and I would be doing.
Not come back.
Without. So
that was a long time ago. Long time ago.
Yeah, I like Paul May. He sends me a deal and says, "Yeah, I was there when you turned 50. I went out to lunch with you, and that was 21, 22 years ago." Paul, I don't need remembering things like that. So anyway, thank you for listening in, and please take the time to send us that. Don't be delinquent about it either. Try to get it in the next day or two while it's fresh on your mind.
And I will be in touch via email to let you know when we're going to do this again. Hopefully, like I said, first part of next month sometime. So thanks again. I'll end it now.
Bye.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Thanks.